Welcome to episode 128 of the Hard Truth About B2B E-commerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back with Tim. I think we maybe missed a week or two. I don't know. I can't keep track. The summer's tough
We
because
were here last week.
we were. Oh, we were. Okay, okay. We
We
missed
did
the
it
weeks
last week.
before.
You missed the week before.
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah, lots of summer travels and summer events and all that. A couple weeks ago, I was in Chicago and I got caught up in that cybersecurity thing. So Delta did not fly me home. I
Oh
jumped
no.
from Chicago to New York, so that was fun.
How'd
And
you wait? So what happened?
well, basically the flights were all canceled because of that. There was that Microsoft update
Yeah,
crap,
yeah,
that thing. It was everything got canceled. I couldn't get home in time. I had to be back like within 24 hours, basically. I couldn't get a flight, so ended up driving 14 hours from Chicago. So that was fun.
Oh my
Haven't
God.
done haven't
That
done
was
that too
that was
long.
your solution? That
That was
was
my
your,
solution, but Delta did pay for it. They did pay for it.
really?
Yeah, they paid for the rental, and I don't want to tell all our listeners this. The first thing that Enterprise offered me, because they had almost no cars, was a dump truck. They said, we have a dump truck you can drive from Chicago to New York. And I'm like, a dump truck? Like, I am not driving 800 miles in
Also,
a dump
what
truck.
what is the gas price on
It was
that?
like
That's got to be like $1,000 in gas.
Right.
Couldn't make some money. Could have hauled some, load.
I was
Go to.
now the ideas are flowing, but at
You
the
could have
time
done
I'm like, oh no, please.
could have done like a B2B. You could have done like a B2B, inventory, transfer there from like a warehouse.
The summer has been a little weird. Last week I was in Baltimore and I visited some old clients and new relationships and whatever, and that was great. That was all wonderful. But now back better than ever. I just want to. I always give shout outs, as our regular listeners know. I have just a couple other people to mention. I may have mentioned him before, Chris Timmis. He is a wonderful investor friend, and I always want to say hi to investors. If you've got the money, I'm very happy to talk with you for any reason. So it's great that we have people in the investor community who also listen to us regularly. He is actually one of many. I've gotten on calls with a number of people who have dove in, and is that the right word? Dove in and started to listen to our podcast. So hello to all of you. Hello to all of our old friends. And now let me just pause for a second for our sponsor mentions to be inserted by our team. And I'm going to throw it back to Isaiah to introduce our guests. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Isaiah, who do we have today?
Yeah, this is exciting. Hopefully it won't get confusing. We have Lee and Larry, two L's. So
Same haircut, right?
yeah. So I bet you guys get that all the time where people confuse the two of you. But very excited to welcome you guys from Viax. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and the company, and then I think there's kind of also a backstory of how this was really an evolution from kind of almost like the previous companies that you operated. So who wants, I don't know, Larry or Lee, who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can kick it off a bit. Hi, I'm Larry Ramponi. I'm the CEO here at Viax. I also head up product. So I wear a couple different hats. My background's always been in technology. I graduated with a computer science degree. I was a programmer coming out of college. My first foray into the B2B space was in the hybris kind of initial waves, maybe 10, 12, 13 years ago. At that point, we had started our own digital agency where we focused mainly in the B2B complex, enterprise space. We were really successful, but we saw a lot of issues, a lot of common issues across all those projects. So about 5 years ago, we decided to build a platform that first and foremost would address those issues versus just building a platform for the sake of building, a platform, but actually try to address the issues that we saw kind of had the front row seats to every day.
Hey,
Right?
Lee, I think you brought up a really important point when I first met you. Or I like the term you use. You guys call it kind of like a middle office software. So we look at it as like it's kind of the back office, right? Which is like your SAPs, Infor, NetSuite. I mean, we've kind of like gone through the gamut on this podcast, and so we've seen it all. And then you have your almost like the front office, your Shopify's, BigCommerce, Magento, whatever, composable. And I guess how would you describe the middle office for people that
Yeah,
don't know what that means?
thanks, Sanjay. I think we're kind of co-opting what Forrester's talking about. They're saying that, ERP was never designed for the realities of the digital world. I think we all know that. And
We've
commerce,
learned that the hard way.
We have all learned
There's
that, yeah.
literally we call this the hard truth about B2B commerce because I mean I've done 500 plus e-commerce sites. A good chunk of them, probably more than half, have a B or either B2B or have a B2B component, and always the most annoying piece is the B2B e-commerce,
Right.
the ERP integration with B2B.
It's not a new problem, right? This is something
Yeah.
that's been for a long
Going
time.
back to when I started the company to today, we've gotten better at it, but it's still a problem.
Right.
exactly. And I think some companies have learned that, some are still learning that, right?
Yeah.
So, and then on the other side of the equation, you've got these commerce platforms that were never designed in the world of complex B2B to handle the complexities of products, pricing, and channels, right? And when
No.
you put those three together, you've kind of got what we call the perfect storm. So the Forrester goes on to say that where that complexity lives is in the middle. And so they've got a category they call digital operations platform. Be that as it may, that's where we live. We live in the
Yeah.
middle, and we solve that complexity. And the way people are trying to solve it today basically is with a lot of customizations. They're customizing ERP, they're customizing their commerce platforms, they're customizing their middleware, trying to build logic into that.
Yeah.
And all that's doing is adding what I would call a lot of IT complexity on top of a lot of process complexity around products, price, and channel, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes very challenging then to unwind that. And we see companies struggling with this every day. We've got one company, soon to be a client, that has spent the last 10 years spending about $10 million a year just customizing their commerce platform. So they've got about $100 million
You want to
invested.
introduce them to me? I might be able to get that cost down. I don't know.
10 million a year. I mean,
Tell them I will get what they need done for 5. How about
That would be a good day for you. And so, therein lies the problem is now you've got what I'm going to loosely describe as tech debt, and they're all wrestling.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on technical debt. We'll spend the whole I mean,
Okay.
we'll have a
Yeah.
second podcast just
Well,
technical
the second
debt,
one
right?
just on tech debt.
Yeah. And so what we provide is an alternative to that customization approach. And we can actually help customers retire tech debt, but at the same time, deliver capabilities that address those complex processes within B2B pretty much out of the box.
That's amazing. Lee,
So
go
I
ahead.
have no, I just want to get for our listeners, I want to kind of put some boundaries around this just to make it a little, richer for their education too. So tell me a little bit about like the categories in which you guys work, the types of companies that are typical, companies that you work with. Just fill that out a little bit for us. Or if you can name a client or two, that's fine too. I mean, just whatever you wish.
Yeah, I mean, we typically look towards the larger enterprise space, Fortune 500 companies, where I guess what really matters to us is that there's complexity that, is troubling these clients, right? It's not your typical lighter weight B2B issues that they're facing, but more the Fortune 500, larger scale, manufacturers, distributors, lend itself well to our platform. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there
pretty much any core B2B manufacturing distributor, which is
Yeah.
a lot of what our podcast is about. It's usually there's kind of three flavors. Your manufacturer, you got, a little bit of B2B and B2C, and you got a mix of channels. distributors just straight up B2B usually on distributor. And then sometimes we see some weird CPG B2B, right? Where like they're a consumer brand, but they sell to grocery stores, right? And there's actually a lot of B2B complexity and sometimes in that, you know?
And the other space we see some traction is so we feel really well in an M&A space, not just a single kind of ERP scenario, which is perfectly fine for our platform. But when it gets really complex, where you have 10, 12, 15, we've talked to customers that have 100 ERP systems, right? Yeah, so you can imagine the complexities.
That sounds brutal.
But even PE firms, you mentioned early on, Tim, that are merging these companies together and now have to figure out how do I, unify this, Epicor system and this SAP system and this other home ERP system. So anywhere where those kind of complexities lie, I think our system lends itself well.
And you can understand why the investor community does listen to us. I mean, I'm not really just like calling out saying, give us money, but this is one of the reasons because they need to talk about what solutions are available when these situations arise.
I'll tell a good story about that. One of the PE investor firms that specifically specializes in B2B commerce mid-market found us through this podcast, and we won implementation of the year for BigCommerce for a B2B project for that for one of their brands, and we had chosen BigCommerce because we were confident it was the right platform. We could essentially eliminate their tech debt. And still to this day, it's been about 3 years since they launched. They have like close to zero maintenance costs. So let's talk to that $10 million maintenance. We're very good at eliminating tech debt, but I can't say it's always going to go down to zero. But
and I think for our platform, and to kind of extend what Lee was talking about here, we traditionally think about software in commerce terms and CPQ terms, and we're trying to flip it on its head a bit where let's talk about the process, right? What is the process actually challenging you guys? And I think it's helpful to partners to sell that way, right? To help their clients think in those terms where, okay, this process starts somewhere, it's going to end somewhere, and it's got all these other processes attached to it. With the process engine, is there a way to model all of these processes, unify where you're modeling these processes, right? Versus having to buy a piece of software that you have to adapt to this particular problem, and you're only going to accumulate tech debt, right? So it's almost reversing the approach, and we play very well with all those platforms. That's the idea, but almost flip it from our experience, flip it on its head a bit, and operate a little bit more naturally to how their business operates. Right?
In my experience, that the smaller or the newer the company is, the easier it is in a sense to start over. I mean, I'm putting that in quotes because it's not exactly that. But the bigger you get, the more complex you get up to enterprise. There is no starting over, right? It's really like, all right, which of these hundreds of things and moving parts are we working on? What's the process,
Right. And if it was as simple as that, right? Because then you have 5, 6 different large scale partners. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's got a specialty. Everyone's got a stake in why we should make a change, why we shouldn't make a change. So the complexities of software, plus there's a whole other people.
The bigger the company, the more we find it's less a technical challenge and like a bureaucratic kind of people challenge and dealing with the personalities and the departments and divisions, and that becomes the bigger challenge for us when we go up market usually. Yeah.
Very significant.
I want to talk a little bit about the core problem that I think you guys solve in B2B, which is, and if you listen to some of our previous podcasts, one of our favorite guests is like Trade Centric, formerly Punch Out To Go. Although they focus on a very different problem, they've seen kind of everything, all sorts of flavors, and I think they mentioned that the most common problem that they encountered in all of B2B commerce was pricing and real-time pricing and availability. So it's essentially, as we know, most manufacturers, distributors, especially at like a mid to enterprise level, they start to get into custom, they don't have just list price, they have contract pricing, and it becomes this like pretty complicated mess in their ERP around inventory per warehouse, price per company. And trying to bring that into the e-commerce platform becomes very difficult. So it sounds like that's one of the core It's not the only thing you guys do, but it's a fundamental core issue that you've been able to solve. So
Yeah, pricing is probably the main reason that we started the platform, right? It was always an issue. The rub on all the projects that we saw is you can never do real-time pricing during searching or as people are browsing the catalog, adding things to the cart, right? Because it was just too complex in the ERP system.
Can I add to that? I want to give you a little anecdote on that. We had a customer that still hasn't got it live and they left us. It's one of the, it's frustrating when you lose a client when you know you could solve their problem. And
Right.
they had this exact same problem with NetSuite and they had, built all this custom stuff and like add-ons and they had their manufacturer that does custom furniture. And so to run the pricing, it's just not real time in NetSuite. It's impossible to run it in real time in NetSuite. And there's a way to solve it like you guys do, but they didn't want to do it. They never wanted to actually get it out. You have to get out of that, you know?
Yeah, it was never the intended scenario, right? It was always more of a back office tool, right? A financial assistant tool. And with most everything, because pricing was in ERP and that tentacle kind of expanded out to, orders and all these other things, now everything's in ERP system, right? So it just became more bloated and bloated over time. And specifically on the pricing scenario, commerce systems were never really intended to handle those scenarios, the complexities of pricing, right? Like they're a
Yeah.
little bit more simplistic on their approach to pricing, right? So, one of the impetuses of Viax was how do we build a modern system that can move that out of ERP, allow your ERP system to function, to operate more efficiently the way it was kind of intended to be, and have pricing executed in a more efficient system. And what we're seeing in the approach is, they'll master maybe pricing records in ERP, but push that to us, and then we'll have the procedures, all the execution. You can have things like, serverless functions. We have, if you want to make a real-time call to understand the price of aluminum during pricing, in fact, then so all these really modern techniques and modern performance is now,
How do they
available with the platform.
how do they manage the process of that? How do they like okay, if they want to change pricing, how,
Yeah.
do they go to the ERP? Do they go to your platform? Like how do
So
they
you
actually
can, you
yeah.
can master all of your pricing within our platform, but in the scenario where ERP is mastering the pricing, they would push it, maybe an update to us, right? You can go into our system. Everything is self-service. We build all of our management tools in a self-service way. So you or whoever is managing pricing go in there. They can find the record they want to change. They could see the procedures, right? The order of everything, the strategies, this one first or the highest price, or so there's a very more of a user-friendly way, let's say, a visual tool to be able to manage that type of pricing, right?
I mean,
So
a lot of the pricing that I see with the folks that I'm working with now, it's all algorithmic, right? And there
right.
are you're not focusing on customer specific even necessarily. You're
Oh
focusing
no, yeah,
location, you're focusing on stock level, you're focusing on time, you're focusing on promotion, you're focusing on volume. It just becomes all of these layers and layers that you keep adding and subtracting, and so it
right.
really is a remarkably complex thing. I wish it were simpler. I always
Yeah.
say that. It's like I wish it were simpler, but it often isn't. It's very complex.
And the other thing I'll add real quick, you wouldn't be surprised that the ERP vendors are telling customers, oh, we'll just upgrade to our cloud version and we'll bring all this under one new version and we'll solve that problem.
Right.
Well, we have better than anecdotal evidence. We have real world evidence that that is not happening.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're doing millions of record processing in sub-seconds, right? Like that's the type of performance
Yeah.
that you should
Mhm.
expect.
Uh,
And just real quick to the context of the conversation,
Yeah.
where I think sometimes it gets lost that when we talk about B2B, it's usually in the lens of commerce. But now, how do you extend that pricing out and manage the same pricing for your other channels? Maybe it's CPQ, maybe it's your dealers, maybe it's your partners. So once you start expanding outside of just kind of the commerce purview, where it's typically a little bit simpler, right? You're selling to, an customer. That's when the complexities and the challenges really, occur, right? And happen. And with our platform being all API first and having middleware and all these integration, techniques available, we lend very well to those scenarios.
Well, I think the reason B2B commerce is so complex and why it's still struggling is because to gain adoption, it needs to mirror what you would get if I called up or I talked to my sales rep.
Exactly.
So if I get a worst price because it's whatever list price. Like, why would I ever order on the website, right? And so, to your point, I believe these companies they need to have kind of a unified or the omni-channel buzzword of like operations around, if I buy on the website or if I buy on all the available channels, it should be the same, relatively the same, right? And just from a
Exactly.
pricing and availability perspective, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and
It
I think
should be. It
yeah,
should be.
yeah, and I think we to the point. I think we take for granted, these are multi-billion-dollar enterprises, but I think we take for granted the challenges, right? The technology challenges they face, where they're operating in Excel spreadsheets, right? They're passing around Excel spreadsheets through email. This is not a fully automated, distributed, operation. There's a lot of challenges just to modernize to get to step A, right? Versus, here's AI and here's all these other tools. It's like, well, how do we get out of spreadsheets, right? Massive challenge
Yeah,
for some.
it would be funny. I wonder if there's like a test you could do on some of these enterprises and like try and get their pricing, and you probably get like different pricing, right? Like you go to like the website or like you call one branch, you call another branch, you get like five different answers, and you're like, guys, like if I'm a customer, this is not a
Yeah,
good
and
experience.
they all face it. I think the issue is, that they just don't, traditionally we look to the ERP to solve these challenges, right? And now there's a kind of a newer way to do it.
Yeah.
It's more of a knowledge thing, right?
One of the things I want to bring up because it's not talked about enough, but I've talked to like legal teams and companies about the issues about having pricing that's too individual, right? Because there are legal issues with that. So if you're an enormous company and you can prove that pricing was because I called Isaiah versus calling Frank or calling Terry or calling Jane, right? If you could prove that, that's a huge legal issue for the company as opposed to volume or location or these other things that you
Yeah,
can
standard. Yeah, there's essentially
standards
no standard, and
Right?
and that's
yeah,
another reason to work with guys like it because really it becomes this huge
I mean,
issue.
it's an interesting point. Yeah, I could see
I
that.
never
Yeah.
realized until I got in the weeds with a lot of these businesses where those are legitimate concerns. If you can say, it's only because I called person X that my price was
Uh,
higher.
Have
That's
you
an
guys seen that? Have you guys run into any
Yeah.
compliance legal issues where they, because their pricing's not standardized, are getting sued by a supplier that feels like they got ripped off at the wrong price? Has that come up?
Yeah, we call that the swivel chair integration, right? Where you call somebody and they turn to pick up the phone and
Yep.
they give you a certain price. So a good example is and the same engine that executes pricing for us does a number of things, right? So we had a customer who a medical they supply medical devices, and there's restrictions on what certain people can buy in certain regions. And before they implemented Viax, I would say after they implemented Viax, they had these distributors calling them up and say, "Hey, I can't order this product. What's going?" Because our system allowed them to place these restrictions, right? Now that we're supposed to be in place probably legally, right? And things like that are now being restricted, right? Where before they kind of had free reins of things that they could have ordered because it was either too complex to implement or somebody just didn't know, where to do it, the right place to do it, or somebody said they did it and it just never happened.
The other dynamic that we don't want to ignore is that it's not status quo in B2B anymore. And why is that? It's because the face of the B2B buyer has changed, right? Stats indicate that at 70% probability it's a millennial. They don't even want to deal with a salesperson, right? They just want what they want, and they want more of a
I
B2C.
hate when I have to call. I mean, I'm in the upper end of that
Oh
demographic,
yeah.
and
I've done the focus
yeah,
group research and the
yeah,
survey data on that too. The vast majority, and it's crept up actually, even into like boomers, really. They're
yeah.
so used to doing things online or with
Right.
their phone.
Exactly.
If you
Exactly.
can't, that becomes a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate. My wife's 36, and like, if you can't give her a good experience, you have no chance of getting her. She does a lot
Exactly.
of larger online purchases, and yeah,
And online, switching costs are zero, right?
Right.
So you've got that dynamic, and then here's an anecdotal story. We met with about a $15 billion corporation, and I asked the question, well, what are your competitors doing? And they said that's a very interesting question because we analyzed that 2 years ago, and we would say at that point in time we were at par with them. Said now we're way behind. So you can't ignore what the competition's doing. People are moving. People are trying to improve that buyer experience, right? And you've got to be mindful of that. And if you can't provide ATP or availability and pricing, you're going to be behind the curve.
What do you think that I truly believe, just like we saw with retail, right? Like Toys R Us died, right? And you had that kind of that shift where like if you didn't make the shift well, you basically went obsolete. Do you think I think that's potentially coming to some of these companies, especially ones that don't have, some of these multi-billion dollar scale advantages. Do you think how much time do you think there is? Is it in 5 years, 10 years? I think it's a little
Time's
bit more,
up.
yeah.
Time's up.
It depends in large part on the industry, I think.
Yeah.
Certain industries are more advanced and earlier adopters. Distributors or the distribution industry tends to be, in my opinion, a bit more of a laggard. There are some shining stars out there, like Grainger and so forth, but for the most part, particularly mid-market distributors, boy, they're really behind.
At what point does that become you're too far behind and there's just not a lot of value to use you anymore, you know?
So I think one of the main areas that AI is really going to, make headway is kind of this conversational, right, commerce where, you can say, hey, here's a part, right? Here's a picture of the part I need, and give me some pricing, or
Yeah.
maybe go into the internet and show me different pricing, right? So if you don't have your products available, you don't have maybe correct pricing for those products, you don't have correct availability, or the guy. So imagine you see 5 products, right? 5 different vendors. You have, one has a better price, and it says, look, I can get you this one in 2 days. Which one are you going to take, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a fairly large construction project, and a lot of our decision making has been around availability, not just price, right?
Right.
Because
Mhm.
we don't want to delay the project, and if it's a little bit more, but we can get it today or tomorrow, we'll take that over 2 weeks, you know?
Yeah. And
And there's a real
availability.
spillover for that because
Yeah.
you can work with small businesses or direct to consumer. All of these things are connected to that availability thing. I was working with somebody in fashion, and they need all these component pieces and whatever going on for their products, like buckles for a belt, for example, that kind of thing. And if the availability, if it doesn't match, if the timing doesn't match, forget it, right? It's just going to be completely useless to them.
Yeah, I think in our, my prior life and probably now, I think two of the biggest areas, right, that we saw challenges were pricing and availability. And availability is one thing of a whole good, right? Maybe I'm selling the buckle, maybe I'm selling a car, but when you want to give somebody an experience, a really complex product where they're configuring that product, right?
Sure.
And this wheel or this rim or this axle has different availability than all the other parts. How do we correctly, give somebody an estimate on when this will be built? Or, how do we allow them to say, okay, show me the fastest build, show me the most quality
Mm.
build, show me the build that's the cheapest because they're being supplied from, these different vendors versus, the more expensive vendor. So those are all things that we've incorporated into the platform, based on, our experience that are available to the API. So if you have a commerce implementation, right, that probably has simple availability where it's like in stock, maybe there's 10 of them or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's just a blanket in stock.
Right. And it's a challenge with these marketplace platforms as well, right? They just get basic kind of information. But if you want to give somebody the true value of your product, right? Tell us about how you're going to use it. Okay, let's start recommending the different configurations of this product. Those are the places we feel like these customers need, to the prior conversation, right? To get to remain competitive and non-obsolete.
I actually think that the biggest use case, there's a lot of these like augmented reality visualization tools that have come online and they got hyped up. I mean, everything got hyped up, right, in general. But a lot of them have focused on B2C. But I think that's actually the wrong application because we've been using it in construction and it's been really helpful to visualize flooring, tiling, all this stuff. And I think that there's a much greater B2B application for these visualization tools.
And I'm working with a
You know,
company in that space too, because for that need, right? I mean, I don't even know I don't think we've talked about it, Isaiah, but that need is huge, right? I mean,
yeah,
people are trying to figure out how to apply that
yeah.
tech to,
Configure the visualization of the
that's it.
car.
Mhm.
or we've done a lot with furniture like that, where you can
Yep.
configure the custom furniture in real time.
Yeah.
So we got it. I'm not going to say the name of this company, but you can configure this furniture in real time, visualize it. They're like incredibly customized. Like so, and that. But the problem is they refuse to algorithmically change their pricing, and they would have needed to do something like what you guys do, which is implement your solution or implement a custom database where we could cache the data and bring in real-time pricing, and they just didn't want to pay for it. So
Right,
they
right.
spent because and just it's stuck in NetSuite, and it's
Well,
like a 5-second call.
before you guys comment on that, I want to give you another real world example that ties into Isaiah. The Olympics right now, you know how all the conversation about the Seine and how they had to clean it up for the triathletes and the marathon swimmers and all that. There were a lot of B2B companies involved in trying to figure that out. And they failed essentially what Isaiah is talking about with real-time pricing and configurations. Because what the Olympic organizers in the city of Paris and all those folks were trying to do is they kept saying, we have this section of the Seine. It needs to have this happen. Here's the depth. Here's the salinity. All these things, these very technical things. What do we need? How do we enter that information? What do we need? They had to get consultants involved, became this enormous issue. And there are only a few providers for that type of industrial environmental cleanup. And they didn't have the tools. They didn't
Yeah,
have
it's an exact use case that we're doing with the major airline manufacturer right now, right? Where they have
Yep.
suppliers for certain materials, and here's the specs, and then how do I select the suppliers that are appropriate for this type of build? So our system facilitates all that because again, we didn't build to it's commerce, and here's my end customer, right? Like you can model any. It's really an interaction, right? There's parties and an interaction. So there are the suppliers, there's the Olympics, there's all these different people involved. How do you have a system that allows you to model those things, right?
Yep.
You may think you need a marketplace because there's outside vendors where really I just want to be able to pull in, third party complementary kind of products, right? Do I need an entire marketplace for that? So those are things and approaches that we've taken to address those exact issues for clients of ours.
That's why I think that a lot of these B2B commerce experiences need to end up being composable or headless. I don't know. I go back and forth. I actually stick to headless as my buzzword, but
Yeah.
whatever. Composable, headless, it just confuses everybody, I think. But the reason I think that's a better use case for these is like, they could use you guys as pricing and availability and maybe some other things. Maybe they use product information from the PIM system. We could pull in, whatever else from other systems, and we kind of pull in the real time. What becomes interesting is what is the purpose of these commerce platforms at that point? Do they even serve a purpose, right? Is it just cart and checkout? I question at that composability layer, like I think these commerce platforms really need to think about their value prop, and if you're just cart and checkout, um, in the
Right.
back end, you might be an expensive piece of software for, and they're not necessarily even doing payments because payments is run by, Stripe or whatever. So the whole composability conversation gets very interesting because everything becomes this specialized piece of software.
Right.
And yeah,
I mean,
so
I think that whole trend emerged for one simple reason. The monoliths were not flexible,
no,
right? So what you really need at the end of the day, you call it what you may, but it needs to be flexible because business is constantly changing. Your business model may evolve. You may enter new markets. You may bring new products to market. You need a platform that's going to grow and adapt with you. However, you can get there. If you can get there with a monolith, so be it. Most people can't, and that's why
well, the
this.
reason you can't is because um, if you use a monolith on the e-com side, your front end is tied to that monolith.
That's
And
right.
so everything has to get crammed into that monolith. And so
Exactly.
you have kind of the reverse ERP problem where just like everything was being crammed into the ERP, if you want the monolith to scale to all these use cases, you're gonna have to cram everything into this. And so like let's use pricing example. You'd have to like override the pricing engine of that monolith. And I've
Right.
done that before and we've done that successfully, but in an ideal world, you just call your engine
Yep.
and
Yeah.
call it
And
a
then
day, right? Like instead
the
of
clients who
cramming,
sold
yeah, yeah.
the clients who sold something, right? And that's kind of what I feel a little bit in the market right now, where there was the initial foray into the B2B kind of commerce space, Hybris, and maybe some of these other platforms, and it really became a window into ERP. A lot of these implementations, right? And that wasn't the expectation. So it's like, what's the next step? What's the next move? There's a couple obviously players out there now, but yeah, I mean, to your point, what is their positioning, right? And our kind of approach is much different. We can complement those platforms. We could be that platform. But we see and of course hoping that there's a shift in approach, right? Where there's something new. We're looking for something different right
Well,
now
it's
versus
funny you say that because we've actually been building that for years, and we've been taking more of a front end approach. So we've been building kind of a more and more advanced kind of React headless front end layer that has flexibility, because from our perspective, it's like, well, people want all these, unique front end experiences, but then it's just a matter of integrations and pulling in the data from the right sources,
and
you know?
I've been talking to people for a while. It's like I think that's awesome. Like that's perfect for us. Now, if you really want to get into the B2B, build that configuration experience, right? Build that really complex pricing that you can display all
Yeah.
the components, and based on who the user is, show them certain components versus other components. Like our engine
Yeah.
handles all those things, but like there's a step forward where I think when we speak to, when we go on LinkedIn and some of these other posts and we talking about B2B and not you guys, it's a very light scenario, right? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people kind of build towards that, whereas there's a whole market that's unaddressed right now, right? And
Yeah.
it's been underserved for a long, long time. We got to get them to see that there's newer approaches, right? But I also think that there's a lot of opportunity for partners to build like those type of things and address really complex issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and implicit what Larry's saying is, if you think back to sort of that technology adoption curve from Jeffrey Moore, the pragmatists are not going to jump on this bandwagon. We're looking for the innovators. We're looking for the guys. We need to find a different way because the current way is not working. The unfortunate part is oftentimes they're trusted advisors who have been making millions of dollars of doing custom work for them to try to solve this problem.
To keep the monoliths alive, right? To keep
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
I
So
mean, if
it's
you're an
self-fulfilling.
SAP provider, you want to keep that SAP install base, as
Exactly.
big and fat as you can, right? Like,
I mean, we've saw and look, there's a place for ERP. There'll always be a place for ERP, right? Does it have to
yeah,
serve everything right now? We talk to certain partners that are like, yeah, the crappier the implementation, the better. Like they're making more money, right? Like the more tentacles, the uglier it
yeah,
gets. You're still paying them to fix things, to
yeah,
do extra work, right? And it's just the nasty side of the business. I
yeah,
think as customers, I look at them. When I was on the implementer side, it's almost like they're merciless in a sense because they're so reliant on the partners, right? Almost all of that development is done by them. So it's you have to almost take their strategic advice, right? Because it's the girl you brought to the dance, right? You're going to dance with that
yeah.
partner. So and this is a whole nother podcast. There's this whole circle of, software vendor, implementer, client. I think there's enough blame to go around for
I think the good news, and I like focusing on some of the good news too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
A lot of the company, I mean, we're talking about a lot of different angles here that are, very positive, but they're all, the dark side too. But a lot of the best part is that the companies are maturing to enterprise level, who
Thanks.
really have invested and
Right.
really do have some, great things going, and they're very tech forward, thinking about, okay, what's next? What do we do with it? How do we address what our customers are seeking, really? And that always makes me feel great because they kind of counterbalance all the really awful people. Like I had to go to a client not too long ago, an enterprise level client, and say, all you're doing is giving money to these people who are going and buying Lambos every year, right? And like that's how much money you're spending through all of these different consultants who are just like lining their own pockets. They're not thinking about your future, right? And it's hard for them to think about it that
Well,
way.
let's talk about technical debt, because I think it's a really important point, which
For sure.
is most vendors, they don't have much incentive to reduce technical debt, or like on the software vendor side or like service side, right? And so, and I think a lot of companies don't understand technical debt, and so they make, frankly, bad decisions that lead to a lot of technical debt, and oftentimes they don't even know that how much technical debt they have because they don't understand it.
Right.
And they have no plan or idea of how to get out of it because so I guess that there's a very general question. What are your thoughts on just that
Yeah, I
problem?
mean,
Yeah.
we implement a specialized platform, right? And that's kind of the traditional way of doing it. And there's usually specialized skills. You kind of got to know how that platform works and, the technologies that it uses. And then that customer typically wants to draw down that team, right? They don't want to keep spending what they did on that initial implementation. That means a different set of resources. So it's just natural that that's going to accumulate, right? Because the way that we approach these projects are this big bang kind of implementation. Someone bought a platform and now I got to implement it. And now I got to kind of figure out how to make it fit my problem, right? And it's never going to be, what you originally thought the cost was, and you're never going to get what you originally thought you were going to get, right? Because you kind of got to do the entire thing. So to me, that paradigm lends itself to technical debt because it's just the only way that it could happen, right? Because you're not looking at your business process in a more kind of operational way, more strategic way. It's almost the other way around, right? So, with our platform, and not to make this commercial, like you can use almost any technology, right, to extend it, right, to code in it. So you don't necessarily need specialized developers. So it's one of the things that we really wanted to address when we built the platform. So it's a bit of a
That is
different.
a good point. Yeah, some of these platforms are too specialized. There's like
Yeah.
eight people that know how to do it, and we had a client like that built all this custom stuff in this programming language no one's ever heard of, and it's like it's just so hard to get away from that. How do you? I mean, I do think that going back to the positive, I think that as companies get smarter, and if you take a better approach to kind of a holistic architecture strategy and leverage the right SaaS tools. I mean, I think software as a service generally, it's not a complete elimination of technical debt, but if you're able to use, good software as a service tools, maybe use some of the apps in the marketplace, you can dramatically lower technical debt. And that's where we've been very successful as just bringing in the right vendors. And then, you're paying, yeah, I think people underestimate that if you get the right vendors, yeah, you're paying a SaaS fee, but generally those SaaS fees are significantly less costly than the technical debt or the alternative.
Right. And it's not now I want to go on to this objective, right? And I don't need a new license because I have this SaaS platform that could lend itself well to multiple.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with our clients where, traditionally they may look at it like a CPQ platform and that's, another license and kind of restricted user base where our platform, lends itself very well to that. So we have, evangelists within the company that are saying, hey, we already have this platform. Let's look at it. This is not an additional license. We could use the capabilities. So again, and it's not just our platform. There's a lot of modern ways to address it. And to the point earlier, we just got to find those people that are willing to take that leap, right?
Fundamentally, it comes back to where we started and the ability to actually rethink that architecture. And we talked about that middle office and the complexity lives in the middle. I think that's more important than the application itself. It's rethinking that. If you look at our clients, they're all innovators. They've all stepped back and rethought their architecture. And Viax is playing that role. Again, not to give a sales pitch, and a couple real quick stats. I did some research before this. Do you know what the value that, I think it was Gardner, don't quote me on that, put on tech debt in the United States right now?
2 trillion.
Trillions.
2 trillion. 2 trillion. Another interesting, I'll just make this observation. The US IT services market is valued at about 600 billion a year.
Yeah, because no one wants to address the tech debt. They kicked the can down the road. I mean, I just had a deal where it was obvious they needed a re-platform. The current commerce platform just it was not a good fit. And then, they came back, we proposed, they liked our proposal, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna hack it. We're gonna hack it and do a workaround for 4 to 6 months. We'll talk next year. And it's just like kicking the can down the road, And so it's just so what is the profile of the innovator that you guys have? What's the like, are these personalities, types of cultures of companies that just interested? How do they differ from the whatever, what's that? And what is that percentage? Is that a
Yeah, yeah. I think there's
20% or yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely culture, shift. I think typically someone who's not afraid to ruffle some feathers within a company. I'd say the most success that we had early on wasn't, we may have been brought in for one kind of, objective that the company was looking at. We didn't necessarily win that bid, but that person bought into kind of the dream, right? Like we get it. This is the right approach. This will help us modernize. And they kept at it, right? Okay, here's another approach. Look, let's talk to these Viax guys. So those people where it's not, we're looking to solve this particular problem and that's it, one particular piece of software. They're looking at their organization as a whole and saying, look, there's a lot of opportunity for us to make our lives a lot easier, modernize our software, grow our business, make our business operate more efficiently, right? To actually realize ROI and maximize, these systems that they've kind of already
So
invested.
so it was you find a innovator evangelist within the organization that
Yeah, and it's usually more around the technical side at this point, right? We want to sell to the business and to the executives, but it's usually that kind of IT evangelist, director, someone who really understands the technology, is able to express it within their organization and apply it to the different challenges that they're seeing.
Yeah. So if you go to a VP of commerce, it's not in his charter to look at the complexity in the middle. He's just trying to, he understands his pain and he understands the solution as a commerce platform, right? That's all he does. That's all he knows. So for us, to Larry's point, where we've had the most success is the enterprise architect, the guy that's looking holistically across it. And maybe it's part of a digital transformation initiative, maybe it's not, but he's looking for a better way because he can't solve the problems and he can't sustain that technical debt today. So that's where we've had most of the luck, if you will.
I mean, I think what I've seen is very similar to what you just outlined there. I think that part of what I see is like I always call it refresh or reboot, like people who are looking to refresh the business in a certain way and evaluate. It's not necessarily a transformation can be a really weird word sometimes, but it's refreshing. It's like, well, what do we need to continually do to keep this business fresh? The reboot is like, the business really has like gotten to a stall point or they're not able to compete any longer or something, right? And it's also the people who recognize that or folks who come in and say, okay, we need to have this conversation now or there won't be a business, right? Like, we need to figure this out. And then the attitude changes, the culture changes, and the tech and the tools change.
The other thing I'll mention real quick that where we see opportunity, and when you talk about digital transformation, which I think that term in general is going out of favor, but
Yeah.
whatever you call it, it largely equates to a big ERP transformation, right? That's the biggest driver usually within digital transformation is we're going to move from all these on-prem instances to a unified cloud version. Well, one of our clients is on a 10-year journey doing that. 10 years. And in the meantime, everything is frozen for the business. They can't get new capabilities because they're so focused on getting this done. We are now running all of their order management process for this global company because the business couldn't wait. So that's another great opportunity for us to look for is where is the business stalled because they're going through this Herculean effort, right? Which takes years and millions of dollars.
Right. And their international, offices that are typically have a lighter ERP or, a little bit on that tail end of the 10-year kind of, migration, being able to almost be an ERP light for those guys, right? Provide a lot of those functionalities now versus waiting, 6, 7, 8 years until they can get those type of things. So, yeah.
Why is it taking 10 years? What is going on? I mean,
No, I mean, no, not, yeah, exactly. That's a great question. A lot of these ERP migrations to the next version, right? Imagine, the over 10, 15 years, the customizations that have gone into, that ERP system. And now they want to go to a cloud version where there's a lot less ability to customize that system.
yeah, it's a lockdown platform, and yeah, I understand.
Yeah, there's some challenges there, right? So
Yeah, it's like going from an open source platform you customize, and then you go to Shopify, and
Right.
it's not the
Where's
same. You
all
have
this
to,
other
yeah,
stuff live now,
yeah,
right?
Isaiah,
yeah.
you may be scoping your projects too short. Maybe you need to expand them at least to 5 years.
Yeah.
Leave the money on the
I
table.
think I would lose my mind if our projects
You
took
know,
more than
you're
like,
reminding me of my early career though. When I was like early internet, I'd work with catalog companies and retailers who weren't on the internet yet. They're like, "Well, we'll do that in 5 to 7 years." And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God,
Bang your head on the table like, oh, guys.
no, you're not going to do it
yeah.
for 5 to 7 years.
In
No,
10 years, we'll have like an AI thing that'll just write the whole software for you. You know, it's like, oh
no.
man. Yeah. It's probably also just like endless scope creep. You know, my opinion, when things go like that, there's probably a lot of, bad management, bad decisions along the way.
Yeah.
I,
Exactly.
I can't imagine they consider that a success after that,
Right. And I think, someone buys a piece of software and they're kind of, here it is, right? And you guys come in and you do an implementation. And that, I think with our approach and what we do is we actually do a workshop with the partners and the clients to help them understand the platform.
Mhm.
Let's get to what the MVP looks like because now you have a more
Yeah.
strategic way of thinking about it. Now everyone's in the room talking about requirements, talking about the parties involved, what we're transacting over, that what that workflow looks like. And it's a much more efficient way of doing implementations. And usually, we do those over like a couple months, right? So you start with a workshop, takes a day or
Yeah.
two, and they have something live within 4 months, right? Which is almost unheard of. Like we're doing projects that you would look at ERP over years that are happening in 4 months, right? So it's a
So,
much
Yeah.
so what are you guys going to be doing in 10 years? Are you going to be replaced by robots and have flying cars, or what are you going to, what's your
a
company?
robot's going to be slinging my golf club. I will be, a +3 handicap. That would
It's always interesting for, companies like yours to think about that because you're clearly in the center of everybody else's innovation. So how do
be.
you kind of stay ahead of the game as well? I mean, what's your innovation process? What's your culture like?
Yeah, so we do a lot of design sessions, right, where we bring in outside people to kind of look at what we're thinking about,
Mhm.
to look at designs that we're working on. We're constantly out there in the market talking to clients, what they're looking for. But you can only be so innovative. I think you have to
Mhm.
understand what your core is, right? And that's kind of where the stage that we're at right now is really solidifying our core that addresses a wide range of kind of challenges that these clients are facing, right? I would love to say that there's, a million things that we're looking at, but again, these guys are still looking to get out of spreadsheets, right? So I think there's a balance of we're a little too complex and too modern where it's, hey, how do I stop, sending emails out, right? And those type of things. So I think we've, our platform is anyone that looks at it would, I think, agrees that it's probably one of the more modern, different type of approach platforms that there are out there.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of innovation there.
Yeah,
I,
we all come from B2B. All of us have backgrounds in it. Some of us work for SAP and on and on. But if you look at the competitors out there, they're all trying to get into B2B, right? So we're already there. We consider ourselves a first mover in this middle ground that we're talking about. That opportunity is so massive. It's just so massive. It's hard for me to even think beyond that. I mean, there's just so much opportunity to go solve these
yeah,
challenges for
Mhm.
companies.
I agree. I agree. I think that, in my opinion, like the Googles, the Facebooks, that's already working. It's being solved. The smartest people working on that. It's these legacy B2B companies where there's still analog, just archaic processes that need to be,
Right.
um, you know, automated. And so I think you brought up a really important point though, which is, yeah, we every project, unless it's maintenance, we'll do some kind of pretty fast moving maintenance, but every full project we do, even the smaller ones we start with discovery, right? And I think that one of the challenges in our space is there's a lot of downward pressure in pricing. Commerce got really popular really fast, and everyone, oh, we'll do a shop. Well, you can go talk to 10 vendors and they'll try and sell through something without much thought, right? And the customers have been trained that they don't need to buy discovery, and that so which we generally do as a paid engagement up front. We'll still give them the proposal and set expectations before that, But I think there's like a retraining that needs to happen that, look, you need to spend some time up front, just like a building, right? You don't just start building a building,
Right.
without an architecture or a plan.
Yeah,
And that's probably why this 10-year project happened, because they didn't do enough to like they probably needed 6 months of discovery, honestly. But that 6 months of discovery might have saved them
yeah,
5 years, you know?
right, exactly. Like, yes, exactly. And it would save them, you're paying for that building three times over,
Or
right?
they might have realized, you know what? The cloud software's not there. Let's wait 5 years, which is
Yeah.
probably what they should have
Right.
done.
Well, these guys are going through these migrations now, right? And this is what we're typically hearing from going from one version of an ERP to the next, where this is not, a year or two. This is 5, 7, 10 years. And imagine now you have, 20 of those ERP systems, right? It's not,
Yeah.
it's a challenge because of the way that I think we traditionally think about it, the ERP and the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of coming towards the end. I guess what kind of like advice or final thoughts for whether it's at the enterprise or even someone smaller, like what, trying to modernize, like I agree the digital transformation where it is kind of played out, but I think every B2B company needs to go through some variation of that. How should they
Yeah.
think about it,
We call it enterprise modernization, I think is a better kind of term. I would say the first step is just be open to new ways of thinking about things, a conversation, new approaches versus, taking your large vendors kind of suggestion, right? Like just be open and have a conversation. That's it. We can open your minds, or other vendors like us can open your minds to newer approaches.
And we realize that when something's new, like we are, it's hard for people to just jump in. And so to help them understand better before they jump in what the opportunity is to leverage a platform like ours, as part of our sales process, we'll actually go through a visioning session with them to kind of look at the art of the possible. And this is all pre-sales activity, so we don't charge for it. But it's really to help clients internalize, what could this do for us? Where would we start? And what would we expect the impact to be? And well, that's been very successful. So again, understanding that just believe me and jump in. And, it's few and far between that are going to do that.
Right.
So we want to kind of hold their hand and take them through that process to make them feel more comfortable.
Well, thank you for this. I think our listeners are really going to appreciate everything that we've been talking about. You're coming at it from a slightly different angle from a lot of the other folks we've spoken to. So really appreciate that. And, I'm just going to say we'd love to have you back at some future date, I think, as we said.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. This was great. We appreciate you guys having us on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.